50 Cent thought this court battle was practically over. Lambda, his legal team, walked into an appeals hearing expecting to secure a major win against his ex-girlfriend. Shaniqua Tompkins, after arguing that she waited too long to respond to his lawsuit. But within moments, everything took an unexpected turn. Instead of backing his argument, the judges immediately started firing tough questions at his lawyer. One judge even delivered a comment that quickly grabbed attention. "You can't believe everything on the internet." Banned. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a routine legal hearing became a tense courtroom showdown. The judges weren't just questioning the lawsuit. They were questioning whether Tompkins had ever been properly notified about it in the first place. And as the hearing continued, things only got worse for 50 Cent's side. The panel repeatedly challenged key parts of the argument, raising serious doubts about whether the rapper's appeal could succeed at all. So how did a case that looked headed for an easy victory turn into a legal headache? And why are some observers now saying this battle may be far from over? Let's break down exactly what happened. The story begins with a lawsuit that caught many people by surprise. For years, 50 Cent and Shaniqua Tompkins have had a complicated and highly public history. As the mother of his son, Marquise Jackson, Tompkins has often found herself connected to headlines involving the rapper. But few expected that a disagreement dating back nearly 2 decades would suddenly become the center of a new legal battle. According to court filings, 50 Cent's publishing company, G-Unit Books, filed a lawsuit claiming that Tompkins violated an agreement she signed back in 2007. The company alleges that she received $80,000 in exchange for giving up the rights to tell her life story, including stories connected to her relationship with the rapper. The agreement reportedly granted broad rights over her personal story, and 50 Cent's legal team argued that the deal was designed to prevent others from profiting from their shared history. In their view, that protection was necessary because they believed Tompkins might eventually try to capitalize on her connection to the rap star. For years, the agreement remained largely out of public discussion. Then, unexpectedly, the issue resurfaced and landed in court. Suddenly, a contract signed nearly 20 years ago was being scrutinized all over again. And what triggered this legal fight wasn't a book, a documentary, or a television interview. It was a series of social media videos that quickly started attracting attention online. And that's where the story takes an even more surprising turn. What made this lawsuit even more unexpected was the way it resurfaced. The legal dispute wasn't triggered by a major media deal or a blockbuster interview. Instead, it reportedly began after Shaniqua Tompkins posted a series of Instagram videos that gained attention. While the public was intensely focused on the legal troubles surrounding Sean Combs, as discussions about Diddy dominated headlines and social media feeds, Tompkins began sharing her own opinions online. Some of those videos reportedly touched on 50 Cent's past, including old controversies, personal history, and his long-running feud with Diddy. Before long, clips and screenshots started circulating across blogs and social platforms, drawing even more attention. According to court filings, 50 Cent's team believed those posts crossed a line. They argued that Tompkins was discussing subjects covered by the 2007 agreement and was attempting to benefit from stories connected to their shared past. That's when the dormant contract suddenly became the centerpiece of a new courtroom fight. But the situation quickly sparked debate online. Some people questioned whether a deal signed nearly 20 years ago should still carry that much power. Others argued that contracts are contracts, regardless of how much time has passed. Meanwhile, fans on both sides began dissecting every new development, turning what could have been a routine legal disagreement into a much larger public controversy. Yet, when the case reached the appeals court, something surprising happened. Damned, the judges barely focused on the Instagram videos at all. Instead, they zeroed in on a completely different issue, one that could determine whether the case should have moved forward in the first place. No? And that question would put 50 Cent's legal team under immediate pressure. When the appeals hearing began, many expected the discussion to focus on the contract, the Instagram videos, or the claims being made by both sides. Instead, the judges immediately turned their attention to something far more basic and potentially far more damaging to 50 Cent's appeal. The issue was service. And in simple terms, before someone can be held responsible for ignoring a lawsuit, they generally need to be properly notified that the lawsuit exists. Courts take that requirement very seriously because it ensures that everyone has a fair chance to defend themselves. Now, 50 Cent's legal team argued that Tompkins failed to respond for months and therefore should lose the case by default. But the judges weren't convinced that the foundation for that argument had been established. Almost immediately, they began questioning whether Tompkins had actually been served properly in the first place. According to the hearing, process servers attempted to locate her using addresses obtained from various databases and online records. On paper, that may have sounded straightforward, but the judges wanted something more specific. How did anyone know those were the places where she actually lived? That question quickly became the focus of the hearing. One judge openly challenged the reasoning, pointing out that simply finding an address online doesn't automatically prove it's accurate. Then came the remark that would grab headlines beyond the courtroom: "You can't believe everything on the internet." It was a simple statement, but it revealed exactly where the judges' concerns were headed. The panel repeatedly pressed 50 Cent's attorney for evidence showing that the addresses used were genuinely connected to Tompkins. The judges appeared unconvinced by general references to databases and wanted proof that stronger efforts had been made to find her. As the questioning continued, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't going to be the quick hearing many expected. The conversation had shifted away from whether Tompkins responded too late, and toward whether she had ever received proper notice at all. And if the judges believed she hadn't, the entire argument for a default victory could begin to fall apart. But what happened next made the hearing even more uncomfortable for 50 Cent's legal team. The judges weren't finished asking questions, not even close. As the hearing moved forward, it became increasingly clear that the judges weren't satisfied with the answers they were hearing. What started as a discussion about service quickly turned into an intense back and forth between the appellate panel and 50 Cent's attorney. Instead of allowing the argument to flow uninterrupted, the judges repeatedly stopped the presentation with pointed questions that appeared to challenge the very foundation of the appeal. The central issue remained simple. If Tompkins never received proper notice of the lawsuit, why should she lose her opportunity to defend herself? Again and again, the judges returned to that concern. Whenever 50 Cent's lawyer attempted to focus on the months-long delay in Tompkins' response, the panel seemed more interested in whether she had actually known about the case at all. The judges questioned the efforts made to locate her and repeatedly pushed for evidence, showing that the addresses used by process servers were truly connected to her. For observers in the courtroom, the exchange reportedly became increasingly uncomfortable. Rather than discussing why 50 Cent deserved an automatic victory, the conversation seemed to revolve around whether the legal process had been handled correctly from the beginning. And every time the attorney tried to move the discussion back toward the missed deadline, another question appeared. The judges also emphasized something that often guides appellate courts. The legal system generally prefers resolving disputes on their merits rather than ending them because of technical mistakes or missed deadlines. In other words, courts usually want both sides to have their day in court whenever possible. That philosophy appeared to be hanging over the entire hearing. As the questioning continued, the possibility of a quick win for 50 Cent seemed increasingly uncertain. The judges showed little interest in shortcuts and repeatedly suggested that allowing the case to proceed might be the fairest outcome. But the most difficult moment for the rapper's legal team was still ahead. Because once the judges finished discussing service, they turned to another issue, one that would lead to some of the sharpest exchanges of the entire hearing. And it centered on a simple question that proved surprisingly difficult to answer. While the judges were busy questioning the appeal, Shaniqua Tompkins had already put forward arguments that could dramatically change the direction of the entire case. And months after the lawsuit was filed, Tompkins finally submitted her response. And she didn't just deny the claims against her. She challenged the very foundation of the agreement that sits at the center of the dispute. According to court filings, Tompkins argued that she had never been properly served with the lawsuit, which is one reason she says her response arrived later than expected. But that was only the beginning. She also claimed that if the case moves forward, she has significant defenses that deserve to be heard in court. One of her most attention-grabbing arguments involves the 2007 agreement itself. Tompkins alleges that when she signed the contract nearly 2 decades ago, she did so under extreme pressure. In her affidavit, she claimed the agreement was presented as a take-it-or-leave-it situation, and that she was not given a meaningful opportunity to seek independent legal advice or negotiate its terms. Even more dramatically, she alleged that fear played a role in her decision to sign. Those claims have not been proven in court, and 50 Cent's legal team disputes her position. But the allegations immediately raised the stakes surrounding the case. Because if a court were ever to find problems with the circumstances surrounding the agreement, the entire dispute could take on a very different shape. And that's exactly why this lawsuit has become much bigger than a disagreement over Instagram posts. The case is now touching on questions about contracts, consent, fairness, and whether an agreement signed years ago should still be enforced exactly as written. Naturally, those claims have sparked plenty of discussion online. Some people believe Tompkins deserves the opportunity to fully present her arguments in court. Others argue that signed agreements should remain binding regardless of how much time has passed. As the debate grows, both sides continue to stand firmly behind their positions. But here's what made the hearing so fascinating. The judges weren't spending most of their time discussing whether Tompkins' allegations were true or false. Instead, they became focused on a completely different issue, one that could determine whether the appeal succeeds at all. And the question they asked next appeared to catch 50 Cent's legal team in an increasingly difficult position. After the lengthy debate over service and the arguments surrounding the 2007 agreement, the judges turned to a question that seemed simple on the surface. But it quickly became one of the most important moments of the entire hearing. The question was this: what actual harm had been caused by Tompkins' delayed response? In legal terms, judges often refer to this as prejudice. When one side asks for a harsh remedy, like a default judgment, courts frequently want to know whether the delay created a real problem for the other party. Did important evidence disappear? Did witnesses become unavailable? Did the delay seriously damage the case? Or was it simply an inconvenience? The judges repeatedly pushed 50 Cent's attorney on that exact point. Monda. If Tompkins was now participating in the case and willing to defend herself, what was the concrete harm in allowing the lawsuit to continue through the normal legal process? Balians. That's when the exchange appeared to become even more tense. According to reports from the hearing, 50 Cent's attorney argued that prejudice exists whenever a defendant fails to appear and respond on time. But the judges weren't persuaded. In fact, one judge reportedly interrupted almost immediately, "No, no, that's not the case." Lander, it was one of the sharpest moments of the hearing. Munged. The panel appeared unconvinced that any meaningful damage had been done simply because Tompkins responded months later. From their perspective, the legal system generally favors allowing disputes to be decided on evidence and arguments rather than procedural shortcuts. And as the questioning continued, another judge raised an issue that seemed difficult to ignore. If there was no significant prejudice, if the defendant was now actively participating and if serious questions remained unresolved, then why not simply allow the case to proceed? Mond, why not let both sides present their evidence and arguments in court? Valence, that question seemed to hang over the remainder of the hearing. Banned, because once it was asked, the discussion shifted away from deadlines and technical procedures and toward a much larger principle, fairness. Bond, the judges repeatedly emphasized that public policy generally favors giving people an opportunity to defend themselves. And based on the hearing, they appeared reluctant to deny that opportunity unless there was a compelling reason to do so. By this point, what began as an effort to secure a quick legal victory had turned into something entirely different. Belandus. Instead of debating why Tompkins should lose automatically, the court seemed increasingly focused on why she shouldn't be allowed to fight back. And that shift may reveal something much bigger than this lawsuit alone. Blend, because the issues raised during this hearing extend far beyond 50 Cent and Shaniqua Tompkins. At first glance, this might look like just another celebrity legal dispute, a famous rapper, an ex-girlfriend, a contract signed years ago, and a courtroom battle over social media posts. But the more closely you look, the more this case begins to raise questions that reach far beyond. Let's keep it uniform as 50 Cent and Shaniqua Tompkins. Lada. One reason is the growing importance of personal stories in the digital age. Years ago, celebrities mainly had to worry about books, magazine interviews, and television appearances. Today, a single Instagram video can reach millions of people within hours. Social media has given almost anyone the ability to share their version of events directly with the public. Beyond that shift has changed everything. For public figures, reputation has become one of their most valuable assets. As a result, many celebrities have become increasingly protective of their personal narratives, their business interests, and the stories connected to their lives. Blonde. That's where agreements like the one at the center of this lawsuit come into play. According to court filings, 50 Cent's team believes the 2007 agreement gave his company broad rights over Tompkins' life story and prevented her from independently profiting from that history. Tompkins, meanwhile, has challenged the validity of that agreement and argues that she should be allowed to defend herself in court. The outcome could influence more than just the relationship between these two individuals. Cases involving life rights agreements, personal storytelling, and social media content have become increasingly common as online platforms continue to blur the line between personal expression and commercial activity. And that's why so many people are paying attention. Some observers see this dispute as a contract enforcement case. Others see it as a broader debate about who owns personal experiences and whether agreements signed years ago should continue to control what people can say publicly. The discussion has become even more intense because both parties are connected to a history that has played out in public for decades. Fans have followed their disagreements, family disputes, and media exchanges for years, making every new development feel like another chapter in a much longer story. Meanwhile, social media users have been fiercely divided. Some argue that contracts must be honored regardless of public opinion. Others believe every person deserves the ability to tell their own story. The legal system, of course, will ultimately focus on the facts and arguments presented in court rather than online debates. Bond, but the public conversation surrounding the case continues to grow. And that's exactly why this hearing attracted so much attention. Because beneath the courtroom arguments lies a much bigger question about fame, reputation, contracts, and the power of online platforms. And yet, despite all the discussion, one major question remains unanswered. What actually happens next? Because after the judge's tough questioning, the future of this appeal appears far less certain than many expected. After a tense and closely scrutinized hearing, the case now moves into a far more uncertain phase. At this stage, nothing has been finally decided. The appeals court has not issued a ruling, and both sides are still waiting to see how the judges will interpret the arguments they heard in the room. But based on the tone of the hearing, observers believe the appeal is facing a difficult path. The judges repeatedly questioned whether there was any real justification for granting a default judgment against Shaniqua Tompkins. They also appeared concerned about whether she had been properly notified of the lawsuit in the first place. Those two issues alone could significantly influence how the court ultimately rules. If the judges decide there was insufficient proof of proper service, the appeal could be denied outright, and the case would continue moving forward in the lower court. Still, that would mean no quick victory for 50 Cent's legal team, only a full trial process where both sides would need to present evidence, witnesses, and arguments in detail. On the other hand, if the appellate court sees some merit in the procedural arguments, it could still revisit parts of the case. However, based on the courtroom exchange, that outcome appears less likely to some legal observers. There is also the possibility of settlement. In many high-profile disputes like this one, parties sometimes choose to resolve matters privately rather than continue lengthy and unpredictable litigation. That would avoid further court battles, but it would also mean no final public ruling on the core issues being debated. For now, though, everything remains open. What makes this case particularly unpredictable is how quickly the focus shifted during the hearing. What began as an argument about missed deadlines turned into a broader discussion about fairness, notice, and whether the legal system should prioritize procedure over allowing a full defense. And that shift is exactly why the final outcome is so difficult to predict. Because if the court ultimately prioritizes fairness and access to defense, the appeal may struggle. But if it places greater weight on procedural delays and missed deadlines, the outcome could look very different. Either way, the next court decision will be closely watched, not just by fans of Let's Keep It Uniform as 50 Cent, but by anyone following celebrity legal battles and the evolving role of social media in modern disputes. Until then, the case remains in limbo, with more questions than answers. This case started as a routine-sounding legal move from 50 Cent's side, an attempt to lock in a default win based on a delayed response from Shaniqua Tompkins. But as the hearing unfolded, that simple expectation quickly fell apart. Instead of focusing, the judges repeatedly pushed back on whether Tompkins had even been properly notified in the first place. Then came the deeper issue, whether there was any real harm caused by her late response at all. That combination shifted the entire tone of the case. What was meant to be a procedural victory turned into a much more complicated debate about fairness, access to court, and whether this dispute should be decided on technical grounds or through a full trial. And throughout it all, Tompkins' own claims about the 2007 agreement added another layer of uncertainty, raising questions that go far beyond a single filing or social media post. By the end of the hearing, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about a missed deadline anymore. It was about whether the court believed this case should be decided quickly or fully heard out in detail, no matter how long it takes. And with the judges showing clear skepticism toward a default victory, the path ahead looks far less predictable than 50 Cent's legal team likely expected. Damned now, the story shifts out of the courtroom and into waiting for a ruling. Waiting for direction, slate, and waiting to see whether this case becomes a quick procedural win or a much not your right, longer legal battle that brings even more of the past back into the spotlight.